Citizens United, the landmark case that was brought against the FEC in 2010, looks like it's coming to an end. California and some Democratic thinkers have come up with a way to circumvent this. It looks like the way that they're doing it is by changing what rights corporations have within a state. And so if a corporation has a different set of rights within the state as defined by the state, then they can change what abilities that corporation has, which this think tank and these guys have decided is a way to essentially nullify Citizens United. What are your thoughts on this, Lucas? I'm curious if you're a big proponent of Citizens United, if you liked it, and if you're happy to see this go, and do you think it'll have the desired effect?
I'm not a I'm not a fan of Citizens United. However, whenever Citizens United was first ruled on, I thought it was interesting because I thought maybe the justices understood how worthless the dollar was. um, and maybe they had some expectation that people were going to realize that too. Instead, everyone has believed the lie about the power of money, and it has had disastrous effects on our political system. When you say that California has found a way to circumvent Citizens United, I think that they are charging right into the heart of it, because for them to attack it the from an understanding of corporation and who has control over corporations in the United States is again going back to a very a long discarded understanding of the balance of powers between state governments and the federal government.
Well, this is not something that most people think about unless you are running a business and you've actually done business in multiple different states. You probably haven't run across this, but I'll explain it just briefly. When you declare a business, you usually are declaring a business in a particular state. Usually, people will do this if they don't have any sense that they need to have special considerations for their business. So, if I'm going to start a meatball truck in South Dakota, then I'll just declare it as a South Dakota business because that's where I'm going to do business is in South Dakota, and I have one meatball truck and I need a corporation to do it. If you get more sophisticated and you're say I'm going to do a startup company and raise money, then you might declare in Delaware or something like that. Typically you do that because you want to normalize the laws under which you're going to be dealing with investors and whatever. But when you go do business in other states, so let's say you declare as a Delaware business and maybe you're located in Vermont or you're located in California, then you have to do what's called a foreign entity registration. And that allows you to do business in that particular state. And if you have employees in a lot of different states and you're doing business in a lot of different states, then you have to do these foreign registrations in each of the different states that you live in. And there are companies that will do these registrations, kind of proxy this stuff on your behalf, but ultimately, this is what you have to do. It's this fundamental infrastructure that they're tapping into, saying, if you're a corporation and you're going to come into our state and you're going to do something, and in this case, it's somehow exercising this free speech right that the Supreme Court has said that corporations have, then they're still governed by this synthetic infrastructure for synthetic purposes that exist to control these non-human entities. That's what corporations are. So I think it's fascinating to see that there's some attempt to rein in the abilities of companies by using the power of the states themselves. I mean, they are the ones that have the most power in the United States.
It's very good to hear you describe some of the nuance in this broader notion that we have with regards to corporations. I have not, I've never incorporated, companies across state lines. So it's interesting that some of this still exists. I think more broadly in terms of corporations as to how they have been um, I don't want to say monopolized, but been created as monolithic across the United States through the use of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution.
I mean,
And I also,
you still don't have that from the boots on the ground level. You have to do this for an entity registration in each state. That's required. So as you start to do business in these different states, you have to go collect these up like cards. It's not that dissimilar from what banks have to do when they have money transmitter licenses. They have to get it in each of the different states as well. So I mean, this is the infrastructure that exists, and you still have to do this. There is no federal normalization of this. It's a kind of an esoteric thing, but you definitely hit it the minute you have employees that are crossing state lines. And this started to become much more prevalent when people started working from home.
well, I still think that this is that corporations are monolithic in that the rules that the states are allowed to make have been normalized through a judicial process, and that judicial process appeals to the Commerce Clause. I I also think that we need to bear in mind what corporations mean. It's a word we throw around, but when we say corporation, we're talking about an entity that is created, that is incorporated. And what is it incorporated to? That's very important to understand. It's incorporated into the tax code. And then if we start thinking about the powers that are given to states or the distinctions between state and federal government, it's the 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 most illuminating way to understand that those distinctions or the differences between those powers is to look at what they're allowed to tax, and then you can begin to understand, how we've set up our government and how we've set up the difference between state and federal government. And the federal government, um, you know, lives off of the income tax, or lives off of drawing taxes from the states. But states are the ones who assess property tax, who assess land tax, who can also assess their own income taxes. And they have a lot broader, they have a lot more power over the resources that exist within their states. And this is why a federal corporation didn't even exist until I think the first federal corporation was created with regards to Washington, D.C., because that is the one place the federal government has national power. And later, the federal government begins to uh, build its own corporations um, after the progressive Republicans come to power with their railroads in the 1890s. I think the first one was in the early 1900s. They've grown since then, but regardless, even though I say the nuance that you're talking about is vestigial, it still exists. And as we have states like California that are trying to separate their power from the federal government, I think this is an idea and a movement that has wheels.
So Citizens United has been criticized as bringing a whole bunch of undesirable money into the system. We used to have these strong guardrails of how much money an individual could donate to a political candidate, limiting the amount of speech that could be exercised to a very flat playing field. Citizens United kind of turned that on its head and ushered in these areas of these big PACs and what have you, of dark money being spent in politics. It's also resulted in big money flowing into very particular high profile races where the balance of power could have shifted. What California is doing with this realigning of how their corporate structure is going to look, they're trying to flush that money out of the system and not allow that anymore, which would return at least politics in California to looking more like what it did in the late 80s and maybe into the 90s before this stuff really came into play. And there used to be a whole set of requirements around equal time of access to candidates and a whole bunch of other rules. I imagine that we'll start to see those types of things starting to get brought back into the conversation as well, saying, we've tried this experiment with allowing for greater speech, more loose rules around this, and it hasn't gone well. I think that we're going to see even more in this direction. So as this starts to take hold in California, likely we'll see other states start to copy this as well, and that has to be rolled out into each of the states. So where you have states that aren't doing this, you'll continue to see Citizens United applied the way that it was before, because this really has to be on a state by state level for it to get rolled out nationwide. Each of the different states would have to adopt it.
The race that's coming to mind right now is Thomas Massie's, and Thomas Massie is facing a barrage of financial interest pouring into his little poor district in Kentucky, because there are billionaires in America who don't like the things that Thomas Massie is saying, and they want to take him down. This has happened over and over and over. And then I also think about the Trump administration's notions of fair trade versus free trade, and their policies with tariffs around the world. And I think what we are seeing is that understanding of fair trade, and a value of local value, and local value being able to devalue money that's coming in from outside. That is what's being picked up on by Californians and Americans in every state. The world and Americans are both tired of their voices being diluted from money and power outside of their area, outside of their jurisdiction. And so I think this has wheels, because the underlying premises behind California's new tack to attack Citizen United have always existed. But what has changed is this notion in society that free trade has been bad for everyone. Bad for everyone. That's a broad statement, but it has been. It's been bad for America, at least.
So thinking about Citizens United, I'm kind of rolling back to this. I know you're maybe putting us in the direction of thinking about fair trade and free trade, but I'm still stuck on thinking about Citizens United for a minute. This, to me, seems like a very novel way to approach the problem. I don't know that we are really thinking about addressing the problems that we're seeing in America at the state level. We're usually saying the Supreme Court will do something about it, or we need to do something at the congressional level to do something about problems that we see exist. On this show, we've talked about how to solve problems locally. Like, this has been a routine topic of conversation that we've kicked around, whether it can be done at the municipal level or at the county level. There's a tremendous amount of power that exists at the county level. And then now we're seeing something happening at the state level. This grassroots ability of the states to start to correct problems was also one of the ways that the whole drug war ended up getting ended, was various states just starting to say, you know what, we're going to just legalize drugs, and this is the way that it's going to be. And the federal government being somewhat impotent to stopping that, as we saw Colorado and a variety of other states start to thumb their nose at these federal policies that have been put in place. Now we're seeing California thumb its nose at the Supreme Court and saying, we don't like how you've ruled in this, and we're going to make changes so that we essentially nullify what you've done. Solving problems at the state level and at the local level seems to be a very positive thing for the republic, for people who want to see change in how things are set up in America.
It's interesting to think about the drug war comparatively. I think you're absolutely right. The states maybe that's where they circumvented. They went around the government and just legalized Colorado legalized marijuana, cannabis, and dared the federal government to send troops in. What was the federal government's response then? They didn't do anything about it except with regards to banking and commerce, and they were able to hinder the spread of commercial cannabis industries in Colorado by removing their access to banking. But as we see, also in the wake of those movements, alternatives have been created, and that is an ever dull knife in the hands of the federal government. As the knife is dulled, they've used it as a hammer, but I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to wield that power.
Well, it is still a problem. I mean, if you talk to people who are in these types of industries where we still have prohibitions at the federal level that, this is still classified as tier 1 drug along with heroin and whatever else, causes problems at the banking level and at a variety of different spots. So it's not like there aren't teeth that get exercised and that cause problems. Definitely we see this fight, this tension between the federal government and the states, but the federal government still has this ability to exert a tremendous amount of control. I like that you brought up banking. This is one area that it seems the federal overarching capacity of the US government has the ability to reach in to the states and do something. I wonder if, as we start to see state banks come into play, that power will be eroded as well.
I think it will be eroded because we're also seeing alternatives to, to an international banking system, which is going to drive again some of this importance to address what is occurring in the area around people at a more local rather than broad level. So I think this is going to be something we see not just in politics, but and we're talking about corporations here with regards to their political influence, but we could begin to see states who are states and counties and especially municipalities who are exacting terms more amenable to the wishes of those localities with regards to corporations. And this is why I say tariffs and this fair trade movement are so important to bear in mind as we begin to understand the context of what's happening here. Because I don't think that it stops at just political speech. We also have the sort of the context behind Trump's visit to Britain, to King Charles recently, had to do with Britain cracking down on the tax evasion that American tech companies engage in with regards to trade in Europe and in Britain. And they were saying, well, we got to come up with all this money to pay for weapons for NATO and pay for our due back to America in other terms. You guys can't continue to allow your tech companies to evade our taxes. And so that was the real reason that Trump was in Britain. Well, one of many reasons. But this is going to be something that we see more and more of, the move towards the move of federalization or centralization in many aspects of our world is swinging back towards decentralization, and this is the Citizens United and the results that it's had on the politics of America is a bellwether of what we're seeing all across the board.
I only know of one bank that really isn't part of the Federal Reserve System, but we did talk about the stable coin that was it Montana was creating. Do I remember that right?
Well, Montana, South Dakota, Wyoming, Texas has its bullion depository. The states understand what's happening here. The way that the federal government controls states is through the money that it passes down to states. And when the federal government has the ability to increase the supply of dollars, and yet maintain the line that the price level, or the purchasing authority of the dollar should be the metric that we're all concerned about, well, they've been able to abuse their power in order to control states. Think about the interstate road system, and what the relationship between the federal government and the states was there. They said in the 70s, you have to adopt a speed limit of 55 miles an hour, or else we're not going to send you the money to fix the federal highways that you have. How did the CARES Act and the Build Back Better bill work? Those were money that was magically created in Washington, D.C. to be distributed at the whim of the federal government back to the states. So the states have begun to understand and to focus more on this supply level of the dollars, and to say, oh, wait a second, we're being duped by the federal government, just as other countries around the world have been duped. The federal government and the Federal Reserve economists have said, oh, the price level is the only important thing, and yet they are they are massively increasing the supply of dollars, and as that realization dawns on them, on one hand, they expect that to collapse, that system collapses as everyone becomes aware of it, and so they've been creating alternatives. And for them also to begin to understand and return to their power to be in control of their own money, they're going to be thinking about corporations and how entities that span their jurisdictions have been used to extract from them, and to operate without contributing at the state level. So they're going to be.
I've started to see some states starting to make a distinction between themselves and the federal government. I think it was Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, was crowing about the bond rating of the state and jibing at President Trump, because he said, well, look, our bond rating is better than the United States. We're doing better than you. As states start to think about how to reduce their dependency on those federal dollars, on those dollars created by the Federal Reserve, you can imagine that the individual states' bonding initiatives likely will be what these state level stable coins will start to use internally as part of their debt infrastructure. I was kind of thinking about these stable coins and saying, well, what are they going to back it on? What is this stable to? And as you start to see the states pushing back and crowing about their own bonding abilities, debt, it's probably going to be that, and they're going to be creating some sort of a state level currency that can be used internally within the state amongst these corporations and the people that are living in the state. And whether it crosses borders, maybe even doesn't matter. It can be a pretty localized currency.
It is going to be bonds. It's going to be a concern about whether these public these public structures, public entities can pay back their debt, and we have been separated from understanding how that works, again, by this abuse of the production, not just the amount of money that's been created, but also by how it's been passed from municipalities to states to the federal government. So money gets passed around there, and magically appears to be able to pay off the debts of the bonds, wherever they may be coming due. So I think we're going to again see not just this occurring at a municipal level. I think about the massive, especially the massive cities that we have, you know, the top 10, maybe 15 or 20 cities that we have in the United States, and the um, I think we're going to begin to understand them as centers of commerce, and the states. The states are going to hold some great power for a short amount of time, but that is actually going to shift back down to the cities that we have. Um,
So the rise of the city state, this is what it's going to look like, more like ancient Assyria and Mesopotamia, where it's the cities that are actually the powerful entities and not even the states that they reside in.
Absolutely, because at some level, the states will find the states will the state's power and the state's money will be born of their control of resources. But as we understand in the world, and you know, economists are not wrong
Well,
about this.
well, well. Wait a minute. So we got to think about what this is actually going to mean. So really, when we see the first shot across the bow is when one of the first cities builds city walls to keep out the passing chances. That's when you know this is really happening, because
No,
you're right about controlling resources, also about controlling territory.
but walls are ineffective. Uh, walls are walls don't work.
Well, walls
Making
are effective on not like letting people into the city as you start to not want a mass migration into the city. If you see some kind of Mad Max style, you know,
it,
degradation of the United States, you may not want people just influxing into your city. So that's what a city wall would do to keep the people out.
well, digital ID and a managed digital currency are gonna be a lot more effective, and they're gonna be a lot easier. And they have boundaries that can change like a wall can't. So as you know, as Denver gets along with Cheyenne, Wyoming, or Amarillo, Texas, those can be brought in, or Albuquerque, New Mexico. Those can be brought in with preferential exchange rates with that currency. The walls that you would ostensibly building around are inflexible. So I think what we're going to see is our digital identities and digital currencies, and people, uh, immigrants, or people who don't live there, don't have citizenship, or don't have a history of occupancy there. Um, they are going to not be able to exchange in that local currency, or not have access to it. Um, that's what the postmodern city state is going to look like.
Yeah, unless you have physical security, it's hard to have cybersecurity. It really hinges upon that. Like in the world of computer security, the first thing we say is he who has access to the machine controls the machine. So if you can't physically secure the borders of a city, I think you're going to have a hard time controlling it through commerce and cybersecurity, because there's always going to be barter, the black market, whatever. So if you would normally want to turn someone away at the wall, having a porous border that allows people to just influx into your city, I think that, I don't know. I'm dubious that that could actually work.
Mm, well, maybe in response to that, it only, uh, I don't know. I don't know. One, you can try to air gap, um, air gap that system, or two, you can think about, uh, how does the banking system provide security for the dollars that are created? The federal banking system today, it's not by actually providing security for against bank robberies. They just produce so many dollars that the small amount that are stolen physically in banks, or even the amount that are actually held by banks, is inconsequential to the broader system. So you could ameliorate what is being stolen from the municipal foundries, by taking the same tack. That all aside, I just think that we are moving, um, as this as the dollar system breaks down and people we understand how it's been working. We are moving to not just a system that's fractured by back to the states, but is going to fracture more deeply But I don't think that's cause for concern, because I think that the cities are going to be able to revolve around a sort of Keynesian or neo-Keynesian notion of barter and service, and inspiring commerce by getting people to do things for each other. And the states are going to be much more focused on what their take is from the resources, from the land, from the iron, trees, and then maybe the agriculture sector in the various states. Regardless, the first step is, and to take it back to what we started this conversation about, the first step, if we're going to live in democratic republics, is to begin to try to lessen the voice of outside anonymous cash or anonymous money, and for the states to be turning towards their power over corporations, to begin to to rein in anonymous cash from outside their, from elsewhere. I should just say from elsewhere. That's a big step in breaking the current paradigm.
We've been hearing a lot about Gavin Newsom going toe to toe with the federal government, with the Trump administration. Do you see any other states doing this? I mean, we hear most about California. It's one of the biggest boundaried economies. If you draw a line around California and say whatever is produced inside of this state and compare it with other nationalities or boundaries that you can put around economic zones, it's one of the biggest in the world. So California and the governor of California going toe to toe with the federal government is pretty big news. I'm curious if any of the other states are doing this. I know that as Tim Walz was a political opponent of Trump in the last election, he's been doing this kind of stuff. So I've seen this in my home state, that I've seen Minnesota sort of thumbing their nose at the federal government. I know that some other cities have had this as Trump threatened them with the National Guard and whatever. But are we seeing other governors do this? I can't think of any, but maybe you can think of one.
Oh yes, but the reason that we don't see it, you put your finger on it, is because they are red state governors. But when I think about states who are making equal moves to separate themselves from the federal government, Texas, top of the list, South Dakota, Wyoming, Oklahoma. The reason that it's tougher to see the blue states making this separation is because they have become so aligned or reliant on the federal government. A lot of these blue states have income taxes rather than relying on property tax to fund their state. This has made them copy the policies and the identity of the federal government much more strongly. I think what we'll see is the red states beginning to break out with their independence with some of the policies that are put forth by the blue states, by the likes of Gavin Newsom, Michelle Lujan Grisham in New Mexico. And so whenever we get a Democrat back in office at the federal government as president, that's whenever we're going to see red states start to break away. But I think that is also going to rebound again back to the Democrats, because I say that the Democrats are the party of states' rights. And once the norms have been broken and they realize that the power of the federal government has been broken, the monetary power of the federal government has been broken, they have the long history, the Dixiecrat, the Democrat, the Thomas Jefferson, Democratic, Republican, nascent ideals of their party are going to come out very strongly. And if you think too about, how that change was wrought through the Democratic Party, it was always about, or the Democratic Party was for the longest time concerned with, securing better lives for workers. And so as they begin to separate the bleed of workers being able to or wanting to or having the liberty to move to another state, to go to a state without union laws, et cetera, their protections for the working class, for the lower class, or their concerns for how to structure the independence of states is going to be very different than the Republicans. And the Republicans have always been about securing liberty and freedom for capitalists or for the upper class. And that's a split that we're going to see realized probably again whenever we have a Democrat back in office. Some of these changes that we've seen in the system that Trump has brought around, again going to the notion of fair trade rather than free trade, and the sovereignty that's inherent in those ideas, or the difference in the understanding of sovereignty, that's going to have big political effects in the United States.
I think that's all we've got for this topic, unless you had a final thought. Seems like a good place to end it.
Just something that I'll add to is, and that I have thought about in the wake of some of our conversations, is that we also have many political entities that exist in the United States that are not represented at the federal level. And we've talked for so long about the gridlock at the federal level. As that the power structure of the federal level that breaks down, federal politicians are going to turn to packing the Congress and packing the court. And so we're going to see the Cherokee Nation, Chickasaw Nation, the Navajos, a number of tribes that have been independent, and independent has been a euphemism for without political power at the federal level. And part of how that has existed was that they were paid off with the federal dollar just at the time that it was created. We're going to see 50 states turn into 61, 70, 80 states, God knows how many. Maybe Canada will be the 51st. I'm not sure I'm not sure which one will be the 51st, but that's an impending broad political change we're going to see in the United States.
All right. And with that, we'll see you next time on FOMO.